Okay, so welcome everyone to the May 4th ACTL meeting. Thank you for coming out this evening. We have a number of things on the agenda, so let me just do some quick announcement items and then we'll move into our agenda. We do have Sarah Putnam, Director of Curriculum and Instruction with us this evening. I'm not sure I saw any other staff arrive yet. We also have Mr. Goldstein here, our school board liaison. I did share, and I think it's been shared widely, but I wanted to make sure that everyone is aware that Bridget Loft has shifted in her role. She has left the position of Chief Academic Officer and moved to back into the school setting to be principal at Swanson Middle School. And the school board has appointed, and Sarah, you tell me if I'm correct, if I'm incorrectly pronouncing, Joanne, is it Weda?
Weda.
Weda. I'm sorry, Weda, as the interim Chief Academic Officer, and that took effect on Monday. And she is unfortunately unable to be with us this evening as there was another event scheduled at the same time. She previously served as principal of Abingdon Elementary School and has held a number of different leadership positions and been active since her retirement from Abingdon a couple of years ago. So I think we're fortunate to have her in that role to fill in until a new Chief Academic Officer is hired. So she hopefully will join us at our next meeting. She was, as I said, not able to be here this evening. We do have sort of two major agenda items for this evening. We're going to go back into a conversation about the homework and grading policies. And then we're going to talk about the APS student progress dashboard. So let me just sort of briefly remind everyone, Sarah did an overview at the last meeting about the homework and grading policies. Those have been in the revision process over this past year and are moving forward now in the public comment period. So they're available on the Engage site for any community members, teachers, staff, parents, students to provide comments on those policies. And I shared the links for you all for them. There's both the policies, which the school board will discuss and review and potentially approve in June, and then the corresponding PIPs, which stands for Policy Implementation Procedures. PIPs are not approved by the school board, they are approved by the superintendent. And so the PIPs also have been under revision, and the grading policy PIP, in particular PIPs, because there's more than one, will continue to be revised over the coming year as, assuming all of this goes forward, as staff engage in professional development and trying out different grading strategies that that the Office of Academics is working with them on. So we are going to go into two different groups. We're going to go into an elementary breakout group, and I think Kelly, Kelly will lead the conversation in the elementary breakout, and then we will have a secondary, so middle and high school, and Jason will lead that group. And the idea generally is for us to identify sort of themes that stand out for ACTL members that we can sort of incorporate into a general memo from ACTL on these policies to just sort of help with the feedback process. Dana, I'll get to your question in just a second. The questions sort of on the table for the breakout groups will be around sort of, is there anything that stood out for you in the homework policy that you think is, either positive or negative? Anything that you particularly like about it or anything that you did not like about it. Similar questions sort of with a grading policy, anything that stands out for you about that policy. And then just generally, are there sort of critical questions about these policies that you have or that you're hearing in your school community that are things that that maybe we need to share more information about or or that the staff need to be aware are questions that people have. Let me just, Dana, did you you had your hand up? Do you have a question?
Yes, hi. Yeah, just a quick question regarding the breakout sessions for the elementary school. I think the conversations or the feedback I've heard have often related to how is this going to transition to the middle school and high school arena. So if there's any questions that are about transition or any questions that the high school breakout teams have about students coming up into the program, can we address those questions that maybe cross over the two breakout sessions after we have the breakout sessions, if that makes sense? Yeah.
Sure, we can. Yeah, sure, we can do that. So it would be helpful even in the elementary to surface that is a question that is coming. So that's helpful. And yeah, we can put those on the table when we do the debrief after the breakouts as well. Just raise your hand again if I forget.
Will do.
Okay. So I'm gonna, unless there's any other questions, I'll go ahead and open up those breakout rooms, and we'll spend about, let's see, about 20 minutes or so in the breakout rooms. So let me get those up. 1 second. Okay, so you should see the option to join a breakout room. Is that coming up for folks? And if you are not seeing the option to join a breakout room, just let me know and I can assign you to a room. So just unmute and let me know if it's not coming up for you.
I am not seeing it, Janet Sater.
Okay, Janet, which one do you want to go to?
The middle school and high school.
Okay.
I'm not seeing it either. This is Charisse.
Okay, Charisse, where would you like to go?
Middle school as well, middle school, secondary.
Okay.
This is Jamisha. I'd like to go to secondary also.
Okay, Jamisha to secondary. Okay.
And Bethany, this is Joss.
All right, welcome back, everyone. So I think what would be helpful to do is just kind of have some quick reports out from those breakout rooms and surface any questions either that are sort of the big picture long-term questions that we just want to put on the table, or any immediate questions that Sarah might be helpful in addressing this evening. So Kelly, do you want to jump in first?
Sarah, you were in my group. You have all the answers, like you got it all figured out. We want grades, we don't want grades. I don't know. What do you got? What do you got? What do you got for us?
I missed the first half, but I heard
that's okay. So just I took really quick notes, a lot of great feedback. It seems that there are some questions. Obviously, some schools are doing this, some are not. There does seem to be the question of, how does APS satisfy families who do want grades? Should I just roll through the top level questions and then you guys can just pick what you want to answer, and I'll type this up neater. And obviously the question about implementation, like how is this going to be implemented consistently, with fidelity across, all of the elementary schools, and the concern about the burden on the teachers, what training will be, provided for teachers to be able to implement this. And also, the education needs for the community and parents and teachers, what is the training and the communication? Like how can we kind of make this easier to understand? There was feedback that this was great, with kids being able to master versus just kind of, getting that A on that test, but then not really being able to multiply. Anyone wants to jump in who is in the group? What am I missing? Those were kind of the main ideas.
Yeah. Well, I had also mentioned that I have some concern regarding getting rid of the science and social studies
Oh, yes,
homework,
that
and
was a good
especially
one.
the big
Yes.
projects,
Yep,
because
yep.
it does prepare kids for middle school and high school. They get to see the A to Z of a project, the timeline, and I think my kids understand the timeline and that they have to prepare ahead of time, because one thing leads to another, and you can't do everything the night before. You have to hand it in because of those long-term projects. And so getting rid of these long-term projects, especially in the higher elementary years, I think it's a shame, because
that was a
it
good
really
one.
added value.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Any from Kelly, from your group, or anyone in that?
Yeah, just one more point that I thought was a good one. Where is the data that this is the thing to do on an elementary school level? Like, is there some evidence-based data to show that this is the best way to go, and how this has improved education in a public school setting?
And is this their standards-based grading?
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks.
Anything else from Kelly's group?
Yeah, hi, I'm just gonna jump on. It's Dana. I guess the only question that's still getting skirted around is this initiative, is this a policy implementation suggestion for just the current elementary schools with some carve-outs? Or is this a broad plan of moving the program up to middle schools and high schools? And I think that should be, I think that should just be discussed now, because as a participant, I hear that it's moving and it's going to be congruent across all levels of K through 12, but it's not specifically being said. So it would be helpful to have that understanding, and I think parents would appreciate it as well.
Sure, Dana. The policies that are up for review and approval now are policies that are system-wide. And then the implementation is, well, Sarah, you can speak a little bit more to the implementation. It has been phased at the elementary school in terms of standard-based grading for the past couple of years, but the overall implementation, the idea is to implement across the school system in keeping with the policies.
And I guess in hearing Dana's comment too about the desire to see it, is it going up to middle and high school? And they talked a bit about this at the secondary group. You'll note that there's no section in the secondary PIP that speaks to standards-based grading. There is a section in there that says a school who wants to pursue an alternative form of reporting, such as standards-based grading, there is a process that they can follow. That section exists in both the elementary and secondary PIP. So right now, we have standards-based elementary practices in some schools. We have traditional practices in some elementary schools. We are not doing standards-based grading in the secondary PIP at any middle or high school. Now, if you happen to represent Gunston is one who over the last few years has been trying some practices related to standards-based grading within the building, really grassroots, right? Helping teachers sort of adapt some of those more equitable practices, such as eliminating extra credit, right? Your grades are just based on the required content that you have to do for that course. They started that a couple of years ago and now have moved to, okay, what else can we try? All feeding into, and now we're just going to report student progress based on standards. So likely when you look at what's at the bottom of that secondary PIP, they could pursue an alternate form of reporting. And that just means a different way of sending it home to parents and guardians, right? You would see, much like we do at some of the elementary schools, a progress report that would have the standards that were and their level of mastery in different content areas. So system-wide, there is no plan to bring it up through middle and high school. It does give the middle and high schools the ability to pursue that. And you'll see in the PIP language there that it says they can, if they are choosing to do that, there's engagement that needs to happen at the school level through the PTA, through the staff. And then it also is approved by the school board annually, if that's something secondary schools opt to do.
Thank you for that. Mhm.
Sure.
Saif has a hand up, and then we'll move to Jason's group.
Hi, good evening. Just two quick questions. One is, I do see in the PIP determination of alternate reporting systems. It seems like it's based on the superintendent's decision and the rationale provided. So I guess it's solely based upon them, and I didn't know if there was a desire to, as long as the it's just kind of, there's a lot of wiggle room there. So didn't know how to interpret that. So I guess that's one general comment. The other comment is the data. So thank you for covering that point. This is not new to Arlington. And Sarah, I think you've heard me kind of mention this before. It would be wonderful to get transparency on the data as to how it actually improves student performance. I know there's maybe qualitative responses from certain parties or individuals, but at the end of the day, it would be wonderful to get actual student performance data through some common metric we have countywide. So how did students perform before standards-based grading was implemented, and how did they do after? Like, is it trending upwards, downwards, etc.? And then along those lines, one thing that's been kind of touted a lot is the equity component. So would love to get some information and to see how those metrics have been trending in families maybe that are have a lower area median income, or those kinds of socioeconomic buckets, to really kind of tease out the fact that, hey, this is actually really helping those families, or maybe it's not helping those families. But that kind of transparency would be wonderful to share with the community.
Okay, so Jason, do you want to jump in with thoughts from your group?
Yeah, sure, I'm not muted. Okay. Yeah, and folks in the group, if I miss anything, please jump in. I'm gonna try to kind of lump them together. So we actually, the end of the conversation kind of brought up a good point. And the question was that, particularly on homework, that to lump middle school and high school together may not, there may be a need to separate those out, because you've got a transition from elementary to middle to high school, then high school to college. And so what might make sense for middle school may not necessarily make sense for high school in terms of transitioning, workload, being prepared. And on a related point, the question about teacher coordination, coordinating homework assignments to kind of level out workload, I think a few folks expressed questions about whether that's a reasonable expectation, if teachers are actually able to do that. And perhaps instead, or at a minimum, apparently this happens in the IB program, making sure every high school teacher has a syllabus, a detailed syllabus that lays out the quarter or semester ahead, so students can plan and manage their time and even advocate. Perhaps they do have two big things due at the same time. That could be a way for students to be proactive, to advocate to get both of those things done, but do it ahead of time. So that was one sort of main topic of conversation. Let's see. Sharice brought up a question about, how reasonable is this to be implemented with fidelity, given not only the diversity of teachers, and their specific capacities, but the diversity of learning styles? How does this work on the ground? So just a general question about different learning styles, and some kids might learn better in the classroom versus with homework, and those sorts of questions. Another question was asked about, it seemed like the policy stated something about not spending a lot of time in class going over homework. So the question was, how will students know if they understood it? So that might just need some clarity, whether we understood that right or not, but that was the question. And Jamisha shared that this approach has been going on, the standards-based approach has been happening at TJ, and it's at least for her, it seemed to be working pretty well, and for her son in terms of making it easier to see if he's understanding the material just by the model. So a lot more work inside the classroom, more practice hands-on work is happening in school. So at least from one perspective, that seemed to be an improvement as well. But then there's a question about whether there's enough time, particularly for math and English, to do all that in class, since that workload is considerable. Another question was asked, or at least highlighting, about the dynamic of classroom assignments that if you're not done in class become homework, and will this capture that as well? Because sometimes those can spill over and create more homework than, or create homework that wasn't necessarily intended to be homework, but is for a particular student. And I want to make sure I'm not missing anything big, but folks who are in the breakout room, don't hesitate to jump in if I miss something important. Okay. Just one last comment I'll say, just Sharice asked the question about time and bandwidth for teachers to do, both these formative and summative types of grading. So just a general question around that. All right, anything else I missed, folks, you want to chime in on?
I think you got it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just comment, because I didn't actually go to either room because I was hanging out in the main room to triage anybody who got filtered out. But I have been thinking a lot about this and noticing that it feels like there's kind of two big heavy lifts. There's a big heavy lift for teachers, right, to wrap their heads around the sort of theoretical framework of sort of equity-based grading and the shift in sort of thinking, and then also the work of potentially changing how they're doing grading, which teachers may be excited about. And I've read that, folks, are excited for it, or maybe have done this kind of grading in other places, but it still represents sort of a big shift if we really move fully in this direction and are implementing sort of with fidelity to the overall policy. And then the second, to me, really big heavy lift is around educating parents about a shift like this to a different way of thinking about grades than probably a lot of people are used to, just based on their own personal experience going through school, or what they've known thus far. So I do think that there's sort of these two big pieces, which are, it's like a big cultural shift, and it's definitely something I think somebody said, over time, right? You can, all of this would have to be sort of implemented over time and looked at over time in terms of the impact of it. Okay. I'm just going to pull one or two quick comments or questions out of the chat, and then we'll move to.
Can I add two things, Bethany, before you go out of there, just related to some of the questions? So I think one thing to emphasize when we talk about sort of that shift to more equitable practices, and last time when we talked about the pillars that are stated in the policy, those that are accurate, motivational, and bias resistant. I want to clarify that those practices that we're asking people to think about and try on next year through the various schools, they really are practices that can exist in a system that reports standards-based, or that reports with a letter grade. So the example would be grades that are based on student work that don't carry a late penalty, right? That could be a practice that you apply and it results in a letter grade, or it results in standards-based reporting with proficiency levels. So I think that's an important distinction, that sometimes I think people are attaching some of those practices just with standards-based grading, and that's not necessarily the case. They work really well within a standards-based environment, but they also just work well when you think about how are we calculating grades. So that's what we're getting people to think about next year as well. I noticed in the chat too, there was some chatter about schools who had shifted to standards-based grading either before COVID, or some that said, hey, can we switch now? We're having a really hard time determining grades. Can I base and give feedback to parents about their students' progress based on the work that I have had students do? And truth be told, during that unique year, we had schools who said, man, I wish I had switched. Can I switch? And we really held them off because it does take teacher training and support, and you can't just sort of flip it and go. So I said, I know you're struggling to figure out A, B, C, D, right, in a system like that. But right now your school is not ready to do that. Now, even this year, schools that did shift, we gave that support throughout the year. And before we bring others on, like for next school year, I'm engaging in conversations with those principals to say, is it the right time? And here's the professional learning that comes along with that. So I agree with the folks in the chat who said, like, I get why that would work, but we also want to be careful before just like rushing to it, because I've heard some parents in here say, I see how it works, but I also see that it takes training and support of the school to make it, to have it done well, and so that parents understand it and teachers understand it.
Thank you. I think just to wrap up this this topic, we will try to sort of summarize a little bit of feedback on the policies. I hope everyone is encouraging their school communities to engage and provide comments. The policy comment period is open until the 15th, and then it goes forward. And if anyone in this group or anyone in your school community is like really dying to learn more, there was a work session. I actually wasn't aware until yesterday when I was looking into it, that there was a work session in the fall with the Office of Academics and the school board on this topic. And so if you, it is a 2-hour work session, so you have to have some time available to look at it. I have found that if you do it I do it on my phone, and I can speed up. So it's like 1.25 speed, and I get through it faster than 2 hours. But if anybody is really interested, or if you're getting a lot of questions from somebody in your school community, you can always point them to the October 19th, 2021 work session, at which a lot of this was talked about and outlined in a lot of detail. So, go for it. Okay, so let's pivot to talking about the APS student progress dashboard. And Sarah, I'm going to guess that you want to share screen. Is that correct? Okay, so the student progress dashboard was released, I think, late March. And just because of the timing of our meetings and agenda items that we had, we have not yet talked about it together. So that's what we're going to do tonight. And I'm going to switch to share screen, and Sarah, you should be able to go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you. Let's make sure I'm doing this right. I'm used to sharing in Teams, not in Zoom. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So yes, as Bethany said, we did launch this dashboard in the late March. The superintendent gave a brief overview of it at one of the school board meetings. So tonight I'm going to walk you through sort of what it is and really the purpose behind it. We already use this data behind the scenes, but now it's obviously more public on that dashboard. So I want to talk through really how we're using that data to monitor progress and then ultimately provide students with interventions as well. So part of that will be the overview, all of the assessment data, the screeners that we use that feed now into the results that you see in that dashboard. I'll walk through the different ways that you as a user or consumer could go to view that data. And then lastly, how schools are using that. The process that every building now is following when they have screening information to identify and make intervention plans for students and then monitor their progress. So really, it is a way for us to show student proficiency in reading and math. We built it back 3 years, so starting with the 2019-20 school year. And you can drop down and look at those last 3 years of data. You can look at it based on school, you can look at it by grade level, or if you have an interest in a particular subgroup, you can also look at it here. So this is, I just grabbed some snapshots of what it looks like if you happen to dive in, but I'm actually going to take you over to the dashboard so you can see. So if you go to that main page, the 3 dashboards that you can visit are DIBELS, reading inventory, or math inventory. So just as an example, I'll show you on the math inventory page. On this left-hand column, those are all the different ways that you can view that data. So that main page will show you the current year and this current school year, and then the 2 administrations that we've done thus far with math inventory, one that occurred in fall, one that occurred in winter, and then we'll have obviously a spring one that will be loaded later. Probably everything will be up there by July, they have said. If I pop back over here, we gather that data through the 3 screeners. So it's 3 times a year. Right now, what's loaded are the DIBELS results for K through 5, the reading inventory results for grades 6 through 9, and then the math inventory results for grades 2 through 8. That's where those screeners are administered currently. And as I mentioned, teachers are already very accustomed to administering that, looking at that data and using it to identify students who might need extra support. It also gives us information about students who are ready for extensions so that they are continuing to make a year's worth of growth, no matter where they start in reading and math. So as I mentioned on that left-hand menu, when I pulled up the dashboard, there are 6 different ways that you can sort of dig through data when you have the time to do so. You can do a division school comparison, you can do a school year comparison, you can look at just 1 year. So say you were interested in how students performed in any given year, you could just go back to the 2019 school year. You can look at the school versus division, option number 5 here. You could look at how the division in a school might compare on a specific date. So you could also remove, say, I'm just interested in 2nd graders. So you could unselect, K through 5 and just have 2nd grade show up. And then lastly, you can look by school year. So it really helps you sort of slice and dice it any way you want. That's the public facing piece. When we shared this first glance in March at that school board meeting, we also helped people kind of think about like current takeaways. If you look at what's up there for this current school year, from fall to mid-year, which you'll see on there is listed as winter in some cases. The broad overview would be that students' proficiency from fall to winter on those 3 screeners overall did improve. And we drilled into just some broad takeaways for each of the tests. So particularly in K2, we could see that more students had moved out of that lower risk or intensive support range and moved up. So the number of students who are identified in that level had been reduced. And then also the area that we want growing, right? The students who are at the other end, that is either negligible risk or they are at that extension level, also increased. So we had students moving in the right direction. For reading inventory, we saw also an overall improvement when you look at grades 6 through 8. And then same thing with math inventory, overall improvement when you look at overall the students in grades 2 through 8. So we don't just stop there. We look at that data and say, okay, what are the areas that we really need to think about more targeted improvement from a division level? And I'll speak to how schools use this in just a moment. Oops. So one focus area, this is just an example. If you were to dig in, you could see grades 3 through 5, and we look at our literacy data, which would be our DIBELS data. If we're not seeing the expected growth we anticipate from fall to mid-year, we look to say, what supports should we be providing? What does that mean for us as a system to tackle that area of need? We know we're aware of that gap. So when we look at how we've been shifting our instructional practices to structured literacy across all of our elementary schools, We have a really explicit phonics program now for K through 3. But really for our 3 through 5 grade students, we've also implemented more specific interventions around word recognition. We now have Lexia at the elementary and middle school level, which is another computer-based intervention for students that meets them where they are. For grades 2 through 5, because we want to see a more targeted support there, we have also implemented something called Vocabulary Surge, which is a resource that teachers can use really as part of their Tier 1 instruction. So it's not necessarily an intervention, it just is part of their, everybody can have practice on word study and the analysis of words, so that we're really focusing on their word recognition and vocabulary. So knowing those things are part of that focus, we would anticipate seeing growth in grades 2 through 5 moving forward. And the other piece that goes along with this, it's sort of just a plug, we are currently going through that ELA resource allocation process, where we will be purchasing a new resources that really will focus on the science of reading, really supporting that shift to structured literacy so that we continue to build student skills in those areas. So when a school gives all of this information and has the data for each student, this really gives you an overview of what does the school do with that data? How are they responding to it when they have it for all of their students? Before we even give that screener, step 1 for us is to notify parents that their student is participating in the screeners. So you were likely notified at the beginning of the year. Once we have that data, then we know if a student needs to be provided an intervention plan to really address that specific area of concern, whether it's reading or math or both. And then once that the assessment results are there and the intervention plan is created, that plan is then shared with parents. So this gives you a broad overview of who should be getting that intervention based on the data that you see there in the dashboard. We don't have PALs on there, mainly because right now we're doing PALs and DIBELS side by side, so that perhaps next year we only have to do DIBELS and we would no longer have to do PALs, where we have a process in place with BDOE to see if we can say DIBELS gives us the information we need. So right now we're doing both. But you can see if wherever their score happens to fall, that will give the school the information to say, hey, it's something, some additional support needs to be provided for, say, a second grader who might be performing in that intensive support range, and what can we give them? This next slide. So we want to emphasize that it's really an individualized plan, and then schools are asked to monitor students' progress based on that plan. So what might those interventions look like? This is a lot of text on the screen, so I obviously won't read through all of it for you, but again, it kind of gives you a taste for what exists at the elementary and middle school level. An example, say, for instance, in mathematics, if a student flags on the math inventory screener as in the below basic range, they may have already been registered or enrolled in an additional math strategies course that's going to give them targeted instruction in support of their other math course. At the elementary level, students who might need support can also do the math, which is an intervention that we have in place there. The nice thing that we are doing for both ELA and math right now in the resource adoption process is thinking about how do we add to our menu of interventions, right? So this just gives you a taste of what people are already doing. We know we need to put some more in place, particularly for mathematics. So we're really excited with some grant funding that we got from the ESSER application that we did in the fall. We're going to be able to do some more targeted evidence-based mathematics intervention on what they call math recovery, which gives really small group intensive support for students who demonstrate the largest need. So really we get to where we are right about now at the end of the year. We're about to embark on the spring test administration. So we'll call that our end of year. If they do all three again, they do DIBELS, math inventory, or reading inventory. That data that we garner from that final round of testing is another way for us to progress monitor, but also decide what do we do now that we're at the end of the year. It gives you a final update. The parent will get a final letter that says, here's how the year concluded for your child. And it will either explain your child's exited the intervention and here's why. They exited because they demonstrated growth and progress and they no longer are in need of that support. Or perhaps it's just ending because the school year is ending and that it could pick up in a different form next school year after we do a fall screening with them again. So they could have a new intervention plan, say from when they were in 4th grade, they'll start something new in 5th grade. It doesn't just continue on through the summer and into fall. We would start a whole new plan. So that communication piece is really important. We want families to know here's where things fell for your child upon the end of that school year. And then of course, the data that schools have, the data that we capture in the dashboard is all used as a reference so that folks can go back to say, oh, what was Sarah's intervention plan last year? What growth was she able to make? We have a really nice system put in place through our Arlington tiered system of support that captures all of that for folks and gives them a roadmap. We have a nice flow chart that says, if this, then that. So that's really a system-wide effort to sort of systemize this support across schools. Since we do hear that from different stakeholders that is really a desire. We need to make sure that the interventions we're providing, the information that we capture on all students is really used to the best of our ability so that it's not different from one building to the next. We can ensure that there is a consistent implementation of this system. So with that, I'm going to pause and see what questions you might have about the dashboard or about our intervention system.
Sarah, can you speak just quickly to, I know people sometimes say, but there's nothing about high school. And I know that there are some screeners that are sort of in the works or in the pipeline for high school students. So could you speak to that a little bit? Because I know that that's a question that a lot of people have had about the dashboard, generally speaking.
That it doesn't show that yet. So we have math inventory and reading inventory that is available for some of our high school students. We use reading inventory still right now with our 9th graders. Mid-year, not all 9th graders took it. So you'll see what you see on the dashboard is not a complete data set. They will all test again in the fall. Basically what happened in the mid-year for 9th grade students that were already performing in the advanced level, schools didn't test them because they said, well, we don't have as many concerns. So we'll just make sure we're retesting our below basic and our basic level students. But we want to make sure we're screening everybody to see that growth. So end of year, we'll capture all of them again. And moving forward, we'll make sure everyone's testing beginning, middle, and end of year. The broader picture there is we aren't truthfully super satisfied with the screeners that we have available for secondary. And we're taking a hard look at throughout next school year, should that be an RFP process that we go through to see what else is available to make sure that we have something that really works 6 through 12. So that then when you think that tiered system of support that I referenced really needs some more love and attention at the high school level.
Great, thank you. Sorry, I wasn't watching the chat. Now I see there were a bunch of comments, but I think they were from earlier. So let me jump to those who have hands up right now, and then we can try to, I'll try to look at the chat and see if there's anything that we need to try to address there. So Meredith.
Thanks, Bethany. Sarah, can you clarify who has responsibility for flagging those kids that need intervention plans, creating and monitoring those intervention plans, and who parents can reach out to and who has responsibility for those if parents feel that their child needs to be considered for an intervention plan?
Sure. So we prepare, the ATSS office prepares the full data file for schools. So that's all sort of one-stop shop. Schools receive their list of students with the data that says, here are students who have been flagged, and all of these students should receive one, the parents should receive a notification letter that their child is eligible. And then from there, they can also create the intervention plan that then gets shared. We've created sort of the templates for schools to use because some schools have more than others, and we wouldn't want them to create it from scratch. So there's a template. They fill in the supports, who's providing the support, how frequently is it being provided, and then that really that PDF is shared with individual parents that way.
I'm sorry, Sarah, who's the they that's filling that out?
Oh, so at schools, likely it could be a team of people. Many times it's the math coach and reading specialist. Sometimes it's the team, meaning the classroom teachers. So it depends on how the school wants to do it. They receive the data, and then overall the coaches often and the lead teachers are the ones monitoring to make sure that the plans are created. But oftentimes we want the person who's delivering the intervention to say, well, here's what I'm doing with them. So if that many times will be the classroom teacher, the oversight is at our point of contact happens to be sort of our math coaches and reading specialists to make sure that when we look at that spreadsheet, indeed, all students have received the plan that was asked for. So that's who you can likely reach out to in your building if you feel like, hey, I think my child had a score that made them eligible, but I maybe have not seen that plan. I would reach out to the math coach or the reading specialist there.
Yeah, I think that lack of clarity from building to building causes the folks inside the building to not know who's responsible, and then makes it difficult for parents to know who to reach out to if they have questions. But I know that's a bigger issue for another day, and I see other people's hands are up, but thanks for your answer.
Sure.
Okay, thanks, Dima.
Yes, okay, I know there are flags when your testing indicates that intervention is needed because somebody's weak or they go into a certain category. But does it also flag when there are dips? In other words, if a student first scores a higher score and then goes down, and even though they don't fall to the level that, are risky, I think it should be flagged as like, why is the student going down, and are you flagging that, and are there any intervention for those students? Especially I'm thinking of middle school and high school. I'm thinking things like math inventory or even reading, comprehensions and so forth.
So what we do from one administration to the next, at the mid-year, we repopulate that spreadsheet to update it for schools to say, here are students who now have been identified as needing a plan if they had not in the fall. But that's likely because of how they scored. That is not necessarily if a student is still in that proficient range and they still are in that proficient range, but maybe have dipped, that doesn't automatically mean, oh, they need an intervention. Because keep in mind, like, we know it's a dipstick, and we're prioritizing the students who are really being flagged as not making progress for that grade level, and that they are in danger of not making benchmark by the end of the year.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Jenny.
Hi, I wanted to ask, towards the end of your presentation, you talked about how next year I can't remember if you said all high school or all ninth grade students will do all of the benchmarks, regardless of whether they're in advanced classes. Could you talk a little bit more about why and what is seen as the benefit for those students in doing the benchmarks? Basically, I'm sort of asking, what's the advantage of spending extra time on testing?
Sure. So not all students, I'll clarify. So for ninth graders, we wanted all ninth graders to take reading inventory. And this year, there was some schools that didn't end up testing everyone mid-year. So next year, we already know that they're coming with their end of year 8th grade data. So we're going to start with that, but then also think about, okay, let's make sure we have a good picture of our ninth graders before they move forward. And if they have reading difficulties, we want to know that. likely we will know because they've come from middle school already having been identified, but we still want like a full picture at that beginning of the year. That's not to say that we would do it with all 10th, 11th, and 12th graders, because as you said, not everyone needs that, but we do need a way of finding, and I was looking at the chat, there are students in high school for both reading and math that they might be in 11th grade and prior to this had not been identified. So we need to find a way to identify those students. And that's why, while it may not be a universal screener, we need something where we suspect something's going on to say, let's use this tool to see where their gaps may be and then be able to provide the support. To go along with that, then working with teachers to say at the high school level, what should we be doing with them and when? It's a little bit more of a puzzle when you think about the high school day and having teacher availability and student availability to give them additional support. There are times we just have to figure out how to make it work.
Sarah, let me jump. I'm going to go to Sharice, but let me quickly just ask Merritt's question in the chat, which is whether high school students who are new to APS, whether they will do the testing.
I won't say universally it's going to happen with all 9th through 12th graders. I would say yes to a new 9th grader that came in, but if a student has transferred in and say they come in 11th grade year, we don't have a screener yet for them that we would use. And I don't think we would just automatically do it unless we had some evidence from them coming in that they had been struggling previously in their former system. That's all to say there are things that need to be put in place there that have not been determined yet. And I think it was Jenny's question, we don't want to over test people, right? Oftentimes we hear that to say, if we're always testing and assessing, when are we teaching? We do need that fine balance. So we don't want to unnecessarily do it if we don't have to.
Thanks. Okay, Sharice.
Hi, thanks. All of this has been very helpful. One of my questions is a end user question for this tool. So say for instance, I wanted to drill down because what we can't see in this data, we can see broad and general demographic categories, but we can't see, say for instance, if I wanted to look at reading inventory performance for Black girls or Black students with disabilities or Hispanic non-EL. So is there a way to further get this data a little more granular? And is there also a way to create other visualizations besides the bar charts, besides the bars? How flexible? I know. How flexible is this?
Yeah,
because I need flexibility to be able to look at what I want to see in Arlington, because there's a story here that we're not telling. And the story is that Black and Latino children, just on the reading inventory alone, are struggling. Mm-hmm. And while we hear APS leadership saying, we've got this broad and general thing and students are improving, when you drill down and you look at those numbers, you say, okay, well, maybe the Black kids in the fall on the reading inventory, they moved from 24.3 to 21.3. That still leaves half of the Black students who took that test at basic or below basic. That is fundamentally unacceptable and it's alarming, and we're not talking about that. So first of all, how can we make this data a little more malleable? How can we create pictures and stories to be able to talk about specifically what's happening? And then the second thing is, how come we're not talking about some of this performance data that really is burying the lead? The lead is that, we've got kids who are really having a tough time and it's showing in the data. But when you hear about it, you don't hear that. So I'm really concerned that we're not talking about it.
Mhm. So there's a couple of things. I feel like there's three different things you addressed. One was the how many other ways can we slice and dice this, right? Are there ways that we could filter this that aren't quite possible yet? So you're right. While we could drill into reading inventory for 8th graders and we could look at it by ethnicity, we wouldn't be able, right now, the gender, fold is not on there too. So feedback like that is really important to say, like, how much more could we filter? Secondly, while it's not public there, schools are hyper aware of the students who, as I mentioned in this process, the students who are performing in that below basic range, and they are creating those plans. And maybe it is an 8th grade Black student who is female, or maybe it is a Hispanic male. Whatever their demographic is, they are going to have a plan put in place to provide them the additional support. So I think for me, the takeaway is we're using this data at that school level, one, to identify those students and then give them the proper support. The third piece, to me, the visual overstimulation of the bar graph is also a lot to consume. So knowing that this was the first iteration of that, that's another good piece of feedback. Like, are there other ways that we could digest this that's not the pie charts and the bar graphs that have a lot of colors and information to look at? So that's always something that we can bring back to the folks that developed this to say, how do we make it more user-friendly? So I appreciate you sharing those comments.
Thank you. And again, I'm just going to push back a little bit on that. I understand that the kids are getting this individual attention at their school level. I'm saying that this is something that is a problem that's not being well communicated by APS. While we're talking about equity and we're talking about changing our grading standards and we're talking about changing our homework standards and we're talking about this and we're wrapping it in the idea of improving equity, reducing bias, we have data here that shows that there's something going on with these students. They're not absorbing the information. There's something happening that they are not doing as well as their white and Asian counterparts. And I don't think that we're serving anybody by not talking about that. And I think that it's something that we should be, because as they improve, which I fully expect that they will, then that becomes your success story, right? But you can't have your success story if you're wiping the struggle, you're hiding the struggle. So that's just kind of my thing, is that these kids are having a tough time and acting like they're not frontward facing. As a frontward facing organization, acting like they're not is cheating the families, it's cheating our community, and it's not giving APS an opportunity to show what they're doing and how what they're doing is going to make an improvement.
Absolutely. So that transparency is really important. And then to say, if what we have been trying isn't working, what are we doing differently to reach all those, to reach all students?
I would also just say, thank you, Charisse, for those comments. And I would also add, Sarah, that my own observation has been that the devil always sort of is in implementation of things. And the more that we know both about what the intention is, like almost at that policy level, but then how it's actually supposed to be working on the ground, and then whether or not it is working on the ground, right? Like, so there's sort of multiple layers, that I think the data dashboard is a piece of that, but it's not sort of like all of the, the narrative there. So we do need to wrap up. I have a couple of things just to have us finish up this evening with. Thank you, Sarah, for lots of airtime tonight, trying to walk us through things. I appreciate it. Again, anyone wanting to share more information about sort of how the community is seeing the student progress dashboard, I think, it's only been up there for about 6 weeks or so. And I think people would, in the central office probably would appreciate additional feedback and input. So feel free to reach out to Sarah, reach out to me, whoever, to share additional input. I wanted to follow up on a couple of quick things from the last meeting. There were some budget questions that got asked that Bridget had submitted for response. There were some questions that she did not have answers to, and I just wanted to make sure that I closed the loop on those, because she did send me some follow-ups. So let me just quickly say, there was a budget question last month about resources to foster student well-being and academic success. So this is around sort of investments in social emotional learning and basic skills. And I'm sorry, I'll just read you what Bridget shared with me. I don't have any other detail, or I'm not trying to open up sort of a whole conversation right now, but she did share that the FY23 budget includes support for student well-being and academic success for, with the following positions: a student behavior specialist, responsive classroom teacher training, trauma-informed and resilience-focused classroom training, a social emotional learning survey expansion, and reinstatement of the ATSS specialist position, which was frozen in the previous year's budget. So those were just items that, that Bridget shared as a follow-up on that budget question. There also was a budget question last month related to the universal free lunch and breakfast, and whether it would be continuing in this next year. And I think there was a misunderstanding that it was a grant-funded program. So I just wanted to clarify. Bridget sent me some information, but I also just happen to know this information because I do food security work, that the National School Lunch and Breakfast Program is a federal program administered by the USDA. It is not a grant program. So it was not something that APS had specifically gotten or had support for. All school districts in Virginia are required to participate in the National School Lunch and Breakfast programs. And those programs are not going to be universally free next year. So we will return to a model in which people will have to apply for free and reduced meals in all of our schools, except the 5 community eligible schools. And those are 5 schools which meet a threshold where enough students in the school would qualify that they simply make the entire school community eligible, meaning everybody qualifies. And that reduces some of the stigma around having such large numbers of kids who qualify for free and reduced. So at Barcroft, Barrett, Carlin Springs, Drew, and Randolph, those will be community eligible schools. So that was the response on that question. I think I just wanted to wrap up by saying that we will be looking ahead already to next year. And if you are, and I can put this out on email, but if you are a rep from a school and you will be continuing to be the rep from your school next year, if you could just let me know, that would be great. If you are not going to be the rep from your school, please let me know. And if you're not sure, you can let me know that too, but I will need to be reaching out to schools and confirming this information towards the end of this year, and then reaching out back again in August to confirm who the school reps will be. So if you are able to talk with your PTA about that and get sort of a jump on that for next year, it would be really, really helpful. I also know we have a number of committee chairs here this evening. I know we have committees who would like to grow their numbers. So if you have folks in your school communities who might like to get engaged with one of the ACTL subcommittees, we'd welcome the opportunity to have folks join additional committees. And you can reach out to the committee chair. There's information on the website. You can reach out to me to find out more information. Finally, I will just say that I have been trying to chase down information about whether we will or will not be allowed to continue virtual meetings next year. So that was obviously a very important topic this past year. We are bound by I guess it's Code of Virginia, related to meetings, and we were under emergency orders, and so we were allowed to be virtual, and then the county was allowing virtual meetings due to its state of emergency, but I am not sure the status. So I'm just putting that out there now. I am not 100% sure what the status will be. There is a large group of county and APS committee and commission chairs like me and many others who all have been trying to advocate for the continuation of virtual meetings. And I checked in with the person who's been helping coordinate that. I haven't heard back from her yet, but hoping to learn the status of that and what it might possibly look like in the fall for everybody. So I think that's it in terms of my end of meeting wrap up. Any questions or anything before we go this evening? We are right at 8:30. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
You as well, Bethany. Thank you all.
Good night.
Hey, y'all.